Welcome to the Leadership for Society series, People and Planet in the Information Era. Today I'm discussing Web 3.0 and the future of technology with Mercedes Bent, partner at Lightspeed Ventures. Hey, Mercedes, how are you?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So I'm going to jump right in, if that's okay.
Sounds
So,
good. Let's do it.
great. Can you give us a broad view of what people are talking about when they reference Web 3.0?
Okay, when people talk about Web3, which, I tend to think in tech, we have overhyped terms that are sometimes reinventions of terms we've already had in the past. But really, what people are describing is this third wave of the internet where you're able to utilize programmable money, smart contracts, and a new form of the internet that is really decentralized, owned by its users, as opposed to in the Web 2 era, what people would say is that there were centralized powers that owned most of and accreted most of the value, that even though users who participate in it were not able to earn that stake. And so really, I think at the core of Web3 is the idea of decentralized ownership. It's also the core innovation in the blockchain technology, which is decentralization and trust through decentralization.
Great. So that actually, I'm gonna jump to a question that has given that description. Um, Jack Dorsey in 2021, the founder of Twitter, I think you might know where this is going, co-founder of Twitter, tweeted, "You don't own Web3. The VCs and their LPs, limited partners, do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized entity with a different label. Know what you're getting into." What should we make of that, given what you talked about as the benefits of Web3?
Look, I mean, I agree with him largely that Web3 was overhyped and that the current era of companies I've seen building in crypto often do start more from a centralized perspective. They do raise a venture round and equity round, sometimes in addition to releasing a token. The problem is we're not in an area yet where the regulation has caught up to be sufficiently kind of viable opportunity for decentralized companies to start. And so there is still, the old, what you might consider the older or the current form of companies that are centralized. I really think, Web3, it has a ton of hype. I count myself as someone who's fairly what's the right word? I'm fairly open to the criticism of Web3 and honestly align with it quite a lot. I think that the true innovation is in the infrastructure level around decentralized uh, governance and decision making. That's the smart contracts theory in terms of how we can decide things through code versus having to have more human-based interactions or human-based governance be the deciding factor. So that is where I really see the true innovation. And then if you separate that, the other area that I find really exciting is crypto as an asset class, and that it's money that is outside of an individual country's domain. And so when you think about the separation of state and money, it is actually not super impactful in a place like the US to me, where we have a fairly strong monetary system. It's more important in maybe emerging economies or economies with high inflation or economies where the currency is volatile and cannot be counted on. And so there's a lot of real things, I think, in the broader space, but I'll align with Jack on that one.
Got it. You've talked about smart contracts a couple of times. Can you just tell us exactly what a smart contract is?
Yeah, smart contract. So, and contrasting it to the idea of a legal contract where enforcement is, done through a judicial system, judges, lawyers. If you break the contract, you can take them to court, you can sue them. The idea of a smart contract is that if the contract is broken, it is written into the code of that contract the consequences and what will happen. So access is revoked. And if this thing does not happen by this time, then these set of funds will be released. And so if you think about, a classic case of, for example, how do you trust each other in money exchanges? This goes back for hundreds of, tens of thousands of years. Or maybe thousands of years, previously people would need intermediaries when working with another party who they didn't know. And you might, as society grew larger and larger, it was harder and harder to trust these people further away from who you know. So you might have an escrow account in the middle where you put that money in, and then once both parties fulfill their duties, then the money is released. And in the world of blockchain and smart contracts, you don't have to have a person sitting there in the middle, a man managing that. You have code managing that. And so if you believe that the code is defensible and that the code was written correctly, then smart contracts should work and they should decrease the middleman. So that's really the decentralization concept.
Got it. Got it. And you talked about asset classes. So I want to go there a little bit. I know you mentioned in one interview you were excited about the possibilities represented by the metaverse. And you've invested in EverRealm. It's a company that works on the metaverse ecosystem. Can you say a little bit about what is the metaverse? And I'd love to hear about virtual real estate. I find this baffling, but can you explain it to me?
Sure. And, I worked at a virtual reality company back in 2016, 2017. So I've been kind of hooked on this far before the current, most recent bull cycle run of the metaverse. And I do think, so if I think about the metaverse, Matthew Ball has a great longer description of it. And it's really a sense of a world, a digital world where you can feel a sense of presence. It's a synchronous world. You can interact with people in real time. You have an economy inside of that world that is powered by a digital asset, and it's interoperable. You can bring assets in and out of that world from the real world, from one digital world to another. And so, what does that mean? Actually crypto's rise and metaverse's rise and the cultural vernacular recently is not a mistake that they came in tandem, because the metaverse, one of the requirements I just listed was a digital currency and an interoperable digital currency. And so we all know it's not necessarily if you have USD that you can exchange that for Mexican pesos every single time. You have to go to an intermediary, to a third party. And we also know that those money sources are not always digital payment rails. And so what's a digital payment rail that can exist in a digital world that is easily transferable? Crypto is that. So that's one element of it. And yeah, I mean, we've invested in a lot of companies at Lightspeed in what could be considered the metaverse space, or in the crypto space for investors in Magic Eden and Bored Ape Yacht Club and Audius and all sorts of great companies. EverRealm as well. When we invested in EverRealm, we were thinking about how can the digital world utilize its own currency, and what will people want to buy in the digital world? Digital real estate, maybe that's not the use case that will win for the test of time, but it is an interesting idea to say you have that sense of home, you have that sense of place that I was talking about, the sense of presence and being there with somebody. That is a thing people want. And so therefore having some digital real estate could make sense. Why do we buy domain names? Why do we buy www, like stanford.edu? Because we think that there's somewhere that people need to go online to understand us and have a presence. And so that is a similar, not exactly the same vein.
Yeah, I find it. I've not purchased any digital real estate. I'll just say, and I find it a very interesting development. And I'm wondering what keeps it from becoming some kind of dystopian situation. So, like, I have bought domain names because I need a place for people to go and find content, right? To go and see the podcast or this webinar, so they know where it is. But I don't have a sense of I live there. I have a sense of my content lives there. And I'm just wondering, is this a separation of like the real world and the virtual world that is potentially problematic? How do you think about that?
It's an interesting question. I think to me, there's a broader conversation around technology's impact on the world as a whole. Probably the greatest counter argument I can make to tech having a positive impact is just looking at the growth and inequality that has grown since tech has arrived in, the 80s. If you look at the percentage in the US of income growth in wages, from the bottom 25% to the top 10%, it's only gotten wider since the 80s. And honestly, it used to move together until then. And so I can clear the argument for why it doesn't work. And I actually don't find the metaverse or digital spaces too different from anything else we've done on the internet, whether it was the browser or the mobile phone or, any of the applications we use day to day. To me, it's just another digital space. This one, 3D, sometimes, not always. It can be a 2D experience as well, but another world where you can place yourself. I would argue many people, gaming is the most popular media category by far in the country right now. I would argue many people are already living in the metaverse and have been for many years. And so I'm not sure that 3D or crypto enabled metaverses really changes anything.
And so you mentioned the inequity, the growing inequity. I wonder how much VCs do care about that, and how much do you think they should care about that? And I also wonder, and this is fine if it's pushes a little far, but like, how do the individuals in VC, how do they affect the way it operates, right? So people have different identities and different concerns, and you're a Black woman. Does that affect how you think about these kind of issues? And do you feel like other people's identities affect the way they engage with them in this space in VC?
I can't speak for everyone, but I mean, for myself, yeah, 100%. A large part of the reason I decided to enter venture capital is because I thought I had a different perspective on capital allocation, who should receive capital, what underserved, underrepresented regions and founders should receive money. And so I lead a lot of our Latin America investing. Over 70% of my dollars that I've invested have gone into teams that have an underrepresented individual as one of their co-founders. And so for me, it's just the imperative. I don't think I would be doing this job if I didn't think I could have that additionality. Now, am I helping inequality? That's a bigger question in the broader world. I don't know if I can say yes at all on a macro scale, but I look at examples like I invested in a credit card neobank in Mexico. And credit is still very difficult to access in that country. Credit is a financial tool that allows you to invest money and grow your wealth in other ways because you have more flexibility in terms of your cash flow management. And so, that company I invested in, there's a woman who's a co-founder there, Marlon. I invested at the Series B. 2 years later, they became a unicorn, and she was the first woman co-founder of any tech startup in the whole country of Mexico. And so I feel really proud at that additionality and impact that I'm able to have. But do I think every single VC is thinking like that? I don't know. I think I'm going to hopefully make a lot of money while also having that lens.
That's fair. So speaking of the inequities, one of the things that's happened recently in crypto is there's been a spate of negative news stories and a lot of loss in value. So people, I'm sure, have heard about FTX. There was the kind of crash in the Bored Apes Yacht Club stuff. There was some crypto bankruptcies. How much culpability do you think VCs deserve for the kind of hype crash cycle associated with a lot of the tech stuff, and particularly right now, crypto and other Web 3.0 or the Web 3 kind of entities?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple of angles you could take to it. We're capital allocators, so we have to determine who to give funding to. There's a question of, do we give the money to the right teams? And then there's also a question of, once we give the money to the teams, are we doing governance in the right way? And are we guiding the company in a way that is the most responsible and fiduciary for the shareholders, which is employees, investors, anybody who owns stock in the company? So, and then there's another question maybe there that I've heard folks talk about in the ecosystem, which is, playing into the hype almost in terms of how much do VCs help and create it. And yeah, when I think about that question, it's really interesting because startups have startups are just starting at a disadvantage. We all know that. They're really small companies going up against sometimes really big incumbents. They need a groundswell of momentum and a strong go-to-market strategy to acquire users, get people to pay attention to what they're doing. And, really a lot of VCs and the startups they invest in are making new categories for the first time. So I do think, combining all of that, plus we are really primed to invest in tailwinds when we think there is something brand new, when we think there is a really strong why now. Obviously, it's better to be investing at the inception of something that's going to change society for the next couple of decades. And so, yeah, we have an incentive in wanting, to get to really make sure we catch the beginning of those waves and be right about it. And we're not always right. Sometimes something starts and if you think about a lot of the climate tech investing, this was before my time, there was a surge of interest there. Did it result in, really big companies? A couple, but a lot of it fell off and there was a lot of lost dollars. So I think, yeah, from a bunch of different angles, we're primed to want to invest in these trends and to, when we see them coming, shout it from the rooftop. It helps our companies. It helps us understand what's going on in this new space. So yeah, I've answered this in a kind of like a couple multifaceted way, but I think, sure, you can say we have some responsibility in driving forward a lot of tech innovation. I would like to think we invest in the tech innovation, we don't create it for sure. We just spot the opportunity. We're not creating the future. So, but we fund it. So it's what helps it grow.
I mean, I would say you all do play a significant role in creating it, at least from the outside. It seems that way because it's true that you might not create the technologies, but in terms of the capital to scale or the capital to gain traction, you all are in the business of providing that. And so, given all this, what role do you think regulation should play in these new spaces?
Regulation, I think there's a lot of kind of hats it can wear. One that I love is consumer protection. I mean, just looking at what the CFTC is doing, look at what the SEC is doing, consumer protection via sometimes trying to stop bad actors, and also consumer protection by keeping us away from money laundering and, fraud, like all of the KYC, AML laws. I think all of that regulation is super important. There's another category of regulation that I always want more of, which is when the government kind of introduces new systems. Like, for example, take in Brazil, the government introduced PIX, a real-time payment system, and they also introduced open banking laws both in the last couple of years, like last 2 years. And this has just seen huge adoption and groundswell, and it's really decreased even the playing field by decreasing competition, by making transactions virtually free, and also encouraging open access to bank accounts, which we don't necessarily have in the US. We have Plaid, but that's a little bit more read. It's not as much write. And so, yeah, I think regulation can play a really important role in protecting consumers and driving innovation. And I'm hoping what we'll see more of, I think we've seen a lot around crypto and blockchain of the first so far, and not even a lot. We've seen a little. I think there's going to be more coming. And where I hope to see more going forward is in crypto regulation. The question I have is whether that suits our government's needs. And this is also part of the inherent, almost conflict between the separation of state and money. Crypto currencies are an independent currency that no government controls. And so in some ways, it's a threat. If you think about the tools governments have to control and provide for their populations, money is actually one of the very large ones. And so I don't know how much regulation we'll see supporting crypto, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for them to innovate and create a more open banking rails via crypto.
Got it. I mean, I'm going to reveal that I know not that much about crypto, but I'm going to ask a question about should governments be worried or not? So one significant role that money plays is a store of value, right? Like if you have $10, you have $10 today, tomorrow. Like, yes, inflation can eat away at the value of that $10, but you have $10. And it's backed, if I have $10, it's backed by the US government, right? That's what I get. I get a promise that that $10 has meaning. In crypto, you don't get that promise. So it seems to fluctuate. So you look at Bitcoin, which I assume is still the biggest crypto coin, and it's fluctuated significantly, right? So there's been a huge drop in value. Should we really worry about, should governments even be worried about crypto in terms of replacing money? Like, I just wonder, is that really a viable use case given the fluctuation in value?
I think some governments are, and are welcoming it and adopting it with open arms. Look at El Salvador, what they were doing with crypto. But can it replace money? I mean, yes, it absolutely could. Would it be better than our monetary system is really the question. And that I don't totally know the answer on. It probably would be better for some people in the population. It might not be better for others. And so for me, the jury's still out a bit. I think we have to see. Crypto's not as that developed yet. It's still very, very early. It's nascent stages, still going through. There's still incentives for people to mine crypto, and so it doesn't yet exist in its post incentive phase where it's just a currency that exists. There might be less volatility once that happens. We have these kind of surges every 3 years with the Bitcoin halving event. The next one's going to happen in 2024. The last one before this happened in 2021. And so these are events that actually increase the volatility because the incentives you can receive for creating new Bitcoins increases and then decreases right after those events. So yes, not increases, but they drop off a cliff basically right after these events. So that is part of what's increasing the volatility. I think we're going to continue to understand how crypto impacts us probably a lot better in the late 2020s into the early and the early 2030s. That's when I think it's going to become a more stable currency.
Okay, so I'm going to move away from crypto and think a little bit about just the relationship between VCs and entrepreneurs. So you were saying that what VCs hope to do is kind of read the wind, see what's happening, and be on board early for what's going to change the society in the next 10, 20 years. And also, people want to make money, right? So you want to return on the money you invest, which is fair. But do VCs do enough to ask or encourage entrepreneurs to ask if they should rather than if they can create something? Because there are many things that could be created that don't make the world a better place. And I wonder, do VCs do enough? Or let me ask it differently. Could they do more to encourage entrepreneurs to ask if they should rather than if they can?
Certainly. I mean, we can always be doing more. I think a lot of VCs, for example, I'm think about AI. There's been a huge explosion right now with OpenAI's growth. We invested in companies in this sphere. And I think that there's a lot to be figured out in terms of whether or not AI is going to be really beneficial and how we can make it the safest new technology. Obviously, AI has been around for a long time, but we've taken a leap forward. And so, what we think about, at least at Lightspeed, is how do we work with the most bleeding edge bodies around safety? How do we encourage our founders to be doing that? Because ultimately, you want to, if something goes off the rails and it blows up, it's going to blow up your company. And that's going to be a destruction of all of the value that we've built. And so I think it's in our best incentives to make sure we're staying away from the edge cases. And then the question of whose opinion is really right about exactly what direction it should take. I don't know if we can get super involved in that because technically those are all individual opinions. And I don't want to put my individual opinion on everybody, just in my investments.
Okay, I'll give it. Let's talk about something specific, right? So social media, let's say 10 years ago, if you got in early, it was a great time to get in if you wanted to make a return. It's not clear that social media has made society a better place. And you could argue, I don't know if this was fair or not, because now we have hindsight. You could argue that what happened was foreseeable to some extent. Like the details, no, but I mean, some of it maybe. And I guess the question is, should VCs care about that? So put yourself back 10 years, you see social media coming, you know it's going to be huge in terms of the returns that it produces, but you can also see what it might create in terms of the havoc it might create. Should VCs still get on board and push that forward?
It's super difficult to answer these moralistic questions, in terms of the broader, role. There, on the one hand, I argue the inevitability argument, which is they're going to come. There is no stopping them. The only constant is that we will increase technological innovation and pace. If someone doesn't agree with that statement, then that would be an interesting argument. But I don't know how you can disagree with that. I mean, what have humans done the last thousands of years we've been on this earth, and tens of thousands of years? We've only increased the pace of innovation, of technological advancements, which is actually spurred by increases in fundamental research and basic science. And so that starts at a pipeline that's way earlier than where venture invest in. But as computer chips are getting smaller, and as we're intelligent, as computer systems are becoming more intelligent and looking more lifelike, can I stop that? No, not as a VC. And so then the question is, okay, so if it's inevitable, then where do you think about your moral duty in inserting yourself? For me, I know what it is, which is I have a perspective on the world, and I think more underserved regions and more underserved founders should get more capital so they can put their impact onto, the next AI ecosystem, or the next financial technology rails, or the next crypto innovation. And so to me, like taking the social media example, it's definitely really clear a lot of the ills that social media has caused. If you look at just the depression rate amongst teens, specifically teen girls, it maps very closely to the rise in social media over the last decade plus. I feel really lucky I was a teenage girl before that happened. And so to me, that's just it's clear to look in hindsight 2020. It's really difficult to say at that point in time, given the inevitability, whether we should not invest.
Mm-hmm. And let me go a different angle. Let's assume, and I do agree, there's going to be technological innovation and advancement. I think that's clear. But what's less clear is what the direction of that innovation and advancement will be. And that's where it seems to me that VCs can exert some influence, right? They're making bets on what will be the next big thing. And those bets influence what happens. They're not independent of the outcomes. And so I guess the question is, do you think VCs could shape innovation? I don't think they can prevent it. I think they are shaping it. Could they shape it with different types of outcomes in mind beyond just returns?
Yes, I think when I sit on a number of boards, and the toughest questions in the boardrooms are around what direction to take. And we often are not giving the answer. We are providing feedback to a set of options that the founder has come up with. But yes, that's one of the areas where we can drive a direction. What's the most strategic direction to take? What is the most capital efficient route to take? What is the highest unit economics, or what is the easiest go to market? Like, we're always asking these questions. And so there's a lot of discretion there in terms of I think you would have to believe, like, in terms of guiding towards an answer that is better for society, that is also guiding towards a higher capital return. I actually fundamentally believe that they're typically correlated, but not always. I don't like to invest in things that are for a small percentage of users, the 1%, and nobody else can use them because your market size is way smaller. And so, I do think there's optionality there. The other caveat, I think the part of the reason VCs even have, like, why is this a tough question? Like, why is it not so obvious that I would think the average person would say, of course, yeah, VCs have a role. And the reason why VCs struggle to say yes is because, we have rules of thumb in our mind of, if you're the one guiding product decisions, or, go-to-market decisions and innovation decisions, and you've probably invested in a bad company because we're not in their room building it. And so it's really shouldn't be our choice. But yes, there's always coaching, there's always advice, there's always nudges, there's slight degrees of that you can expand the view of how that company is facing that do ultimately, if you change the degree by half a grade or 1% or 2%, it does have a really large impact in the long run.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that's fair. I guess what I would say is from the outside is I would say, but you're picking those people, right? And you can look at some of the cases recently where things have not worked out well and say like, I wonder why they picked those people, right? And so it's not just the companies, right? So I have one, well, it's kind of a two-part question at the end of that, ask everyone. As you think about your space, the space you're working in, technology VC, what do you fear and what do you hope in terms of the future?
Well, much more short-term fear is that 2023 is going to have a lot of companies go under because we had overfunded and underbuilt business models the last couple of years. Yes, funded by us. And so that's the short-term fear. I'm spending a ton of my time with portfolio companies trying to figure out which ones have a viable path forward and unfortunately which ones won't. And what was the other part? The opportunity?
What's your hope for the future?
My hope for the future, my hope is that more deserving founders from underrepresented regions or backgrounds will get funded. So I hope more people will recognize stats like, the paltry percentage of women founders getting funded actually tend to over return compared to their peer set across genders. And so that, is something I always think of. This part does honestly confuse me quite a lot when you think about like, okay, are VCs really capitalist? Of course, there's bias in what VCs are doing, because if you're really just a capitalist, you would go, there's an arbitrage opportunity. Women return way more money as founders, so I should fund women all day long. And the reason they don't is because of all sorts of biases, similarity bias included. And so my hope would be that people find better ways to check their similarity bias. Honestly, the best way is that I have found the gateway, to investing in more deserving founders that are going to return you higher money. It's for a lot of men, it's having a daughter. And then if having a daughter and having her go on to, have an amazing career, you start to go, wow, maybe I should invest in more. So there's actually stats around this. Like the average male VC who has a daughter invest in more women founders than the male VC who does not have a daughter. So just have more daughters. Like maybe we need to go out and do that. And otherwise, yeah, like just continue to fight the fight. Like I think a lot about how will I affect change as someone with this viewpoint in venture. It's so multifaceted. It's got to be through my investments. Okay, but they're a small drop in the bucket. I'm investing, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars compared to the billions and hundreds of billions and trillions in the asset class. And then but that's one thing to start doing it, give the example, be the example. But then also like recruit more people into these funds. What's something I'm really proud of is like when I started at Lightspeed maybe 3.5 years ago, I was the first Black woman to ever, I believe, maybe not, but I believe to be hired at the fund. And now we have, we had 2 more Black investors join in just the last couple of years. And so like, how can we start to just hire people with different perspectives? Race is clearly not the only different perspective. There's income and country and all sorts of things. But basically, how do we get more perspectives that are not already in VC to be in VC? And I think that's going to help the more VC looks like the country and the world, the more we're probably going to have better outcomes.
Yeah, okay. I like that hope. That's a great hope. And I hope that it doesn't take having daughters to improve the representation of women in the space. But thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
I think it does. Thank you. This is really fun. Tough questions. You got me thinking a lot, but You know, at the end of the day, if I can still sit down and say, like, I'm glad I'm in this industry and I think I'm doing something good, I can still like go to sleep well at night. And so far that's true, then that's gonna, as long as I can say that, I'm gonna keep doing it. So that's the goal.
That is a good way to think about it. I agree. Our next conversation will be on February 27th at 6:30 Pacific time, and we will explore information technology and actions needed to address climate change. And our guest will be Congressman Joe Neguse. Thanks.